The skies above Arizona split open at 3 in the morning. A rift, like a wound stitched badly, tore into the stars and groaned with a low mechanical growl. Blue lightning arced from the edges of the tier, flashing across the desert scrub as a massive shadow descended from the breach. It was shaped like a gnarled root tangled around a spinning core, with spires jutting at odd angles, rotating slowly as it settled just outside of Flagstaff. Inside the ship, a being of enormous girth and glimmering silver skin leaned forward on his throne. King Varnok of the Ulari Dominion, ruler of 6 spiral arms, squinted through the projection hovering before him. "This world," he said, his voice slow and heavy, "is filthy." A smaller, green-skinned creature with a long neck and a hunched back nodded rapidly. "Yes, Supreme Radiance. It is called Earth. Its atmosphere is toxic to 2/3 of known species, yet the dominant life form thrives." "Humans," Varnok said, rolling the word in his mouth like it tasted bad. "They burn fuel for power. They bury materials that still contain atomic potential. They discard everything," Varnok's eyes narrowed. "And yet they survive. When our reactors failed, when our suns collapsed, when half my fleet was lost to the void, we could not adapt. They do. They do not just survive, they multiply." The advisor nodded again. "Shall I prepare an observation team, Your Eminent?" "No, I will go myself." Elias Trent was not having a good week. His solar panels had fried during a dust storm, his landlord threatened eviction over a missing rent payment, and now his dog Biscuit had eaten a bag of insulation foam. He stood in his cluttered garage, brushing dust from a pile of copper wiring he'd salvaged from an old microwave. The walls were stacked with broken appliances, soda cans, cracked phone screens, even a rusted leaf blower. On the table in the center sat a device roughly the size of a toaster, cobbled from scrap metal, wires, and a strange humming coil he'd pulled from an abandoned traffic light. Biscuit barked from outside. Elias looked up. The sky above his backyard was glowing. He stepped out and stared at the descending structure. It hovered above his neighbor's cornfield, casting a deep shadow over the entire block. His jaw slackened as a beam of shimmering light extended from the ship's belly and touched down 10 feet from his grill. Out of it stepped Varnok. The king stood at least 10 feet tall and wore an angular robe that shimmered like oil. His 4 arms folded across his chest as he scanned the area. Elias blinked. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's new. You are Elias Trent," Varnok said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Elias said. Who's asking?" "I am Varnok, ruler of the Ulari Dominion, seeker of energy, last hope of my people." "Right, I'm just a guy with a garage." "You created a device," Varnok said, stepping forward, "that converts refuse into power." Elias looked back inside at the contraption on his table. "I mean, it kind of works, sometimes. It caught fire last week. You created energy from trash with no galactic backing, no support, no funding." "I was just trying to power my fridge." Varnok stepped inside the garage, careful not to knock over the door frame. He studied the device. It was humming quietly, the coil pulsing with a soft green light. Elias had fed it a cracked coffee maker earlier and it had kept his lights on for almost 6 hours. "What is your process?" Varnok asked. "Well, I use a piezoelectric coil to convert pressure from compressed waste into a charge. Then I reroute it through a thermal regulator." "Stop." Varnok turned to his advisor, who had just entered with a translator drone hovering beside him. "Have our engineers replicate this," Varnok ordered. The advisor scowled. "It is built from garbage?" "Yes," Varnok said, "and it works." Elias scratched the back of his head. "Look, I'm not sure it's stable on a large scale. This thing's janky. It nearly exploded when I shoved in a blender." Varnok looked genuinely intrigued. "Your planet produces 2 billion tons of waste each year." "Yeah, it's a problem. I want you to build me a reactor." Elias blinked. "I'm not a scientist. I'm just a guy who's good at fixing broken stuff. You will have access to my ships, my materials, and my engineers." Elias looked at the alien king, then back at his garage. "Do I get paid?" Varnok turned to his advisor. "Give him a mountain of gold." 3 days later, Elias stood inside the Ulari mothership's engineering bay, surrounded by beings that ranged from six-eyed technicians to floating spheres that communicated through color pulses. His hands were greasy. A piece of scorched plastic smoked on the floor near his foot. "This isn't going to work unless you stop trying to liquefy everything," Elias said, pointing at a blueprint. The engineer beside him grunted, "We optimize. You're melting toothbrushes." "That's not optimization, that's overkill." Varnok entered the bay. Status. Elias wiped his hands on his jeans. "We built a prototype. It powers a section of your ship using nothing but your trash compactors." Varnok turned to an aide. "Show me." The aide led them into a corridor lined with glowing panels. The lights were brighter here. The air was warmer. A small monitor displayed the energy output, stable, efficient, increasing. Elias crossed his arms. "I used a compressed thermal exchange core from your broken food processors. Turns out your waste has more potential than you thought." Varnok studied him. "You turned our refuse into power." "Yeah, I mean I had help. And I'm still not sure if this thing'll hold up over time." "It must." Varnok's tone was suddenly harder. "We have reached the end, Elias Trent. Our stars are dying, our fuel is gone. If your reactor fails, my empire collapses." Elias swallowed. "No pressure then." The following weeks were a blur of soldering, testing, and arguing with aliens who insisted on replacing screws with plasma bolts. The reactor grew in size. It now spanned an entire chamber of the ship, filled with conveyor belts feeding discarded material into glowing chambers that buzzed with controlled energy bursts. Elias barely slept. He burned his hand twice. He developed a cough from inhaling alien vapor residue, but the reactor held. It worked. Power returned to the ship's failing systems. The Ulari fleet, long stranded in orbit, began to stir again. Then came the Saybex. They arrived without warning, sleek black ships cutting through the atmosphere like blades. The Ulari's ancient enemy, drawn by the sudden spike of power signatures. Explosions rocked the outer hull. Elias was thrown across the engineering bay, slamming into a metal beam. Pain lanced through his shoulder. He tried to stand, but his left arm hung uselessly at his side. Varnok burst into the bay. "We are under attack." "The Saybex want the reactor." Elias gritted his teeth. "Then don't let them take it. You are injured." "Yeah, pretty bad, might be broken." Varnok turned to a medic who scanned Elias's shoulder with a handheld device. "Clavicle fracture." Elias winced. "Great, you must rest." "No. If they hit the intake shaft, the reactor will collapse. I need to reroute the waste flow manually." "You will not survive." Elias glared at him. "Then help me make it fast." They reached the intake shaft under fire. Saybex soldiers had breached the outer hull sleek, gray-skinned beings with spines along their backs and weapons that crackled with blue energy. Elias ducked behind a panel, clutching his shoulder. He pointed at the control box. "Override that seal. Redirect the flow to Chamber 3. Varnok nodded and moved with surprising speed for his size. Elias crawled to the next junction, dragging his legs behind him. A blast hit the wall beside him, showering him with sparks. He reached the main valve and punched the code with his good hand. The hum deepened. The reactor stabilized. Varnok returned and pulled Elias to safety. The Saybex were repelled minutes later by a surge of energy that knocked their ships out of orbit, fed directly from the reactor. Elias passed out before he saw it. He woke 5 days later, his shoulder in a brace, his body sore but intact. The Ulari medical ward smelled like citrus and metal. Varnok stood beside him. "You saved us." "I nearly died." "You nearly gave us a future." Elias chuckled weakly. "Glad my junk pile was good for something." "You will be honored, forever." Elias nodded slowly. "Can I go home? I think Biscuit misses me. We will take you, and we will send you materials, so you may build more." Elias looked at the ceiling. "Just maybe somewhere with less shooting next time." Varnok nodded, agreed. Elias Trent hated space elevators. Not for the usual reasons: vertigo, claustrophobia, or the fact that they screamed terrible idea with every creak, but because being suspended in a glass chamber tethered between Earth and a starship the size of Vermont gave him way too much time to think. His sling itched. The Ulari brace was made from a strange rubbery mesh that adjusted to his temperature and pulsed faintly every few minutes. Apparently, it was stimulating bone growth or nerve regeneration, or something equally sci-fi. All Elias knew was that it tingled like he'd stuck his shoulder into a bowl of soda. The elevator groaned gently as it docked with the ship. The doors peeled open into a corridor that smelled faintly of cinnamon and ozone. 4 Ulari guards, each with a different number of limbs and blinking eye configurations, stood at attention. One of them held out what looked like a flattened orange mushroom. "Eat this," they said. "I'm good, thanks. It will regulate your equilibrium. Your gravity tolerance is below threshold." Elias took the mushroom, hesitated, then bit into the leathery edge. The flavor was somewhere between garlic and regret. "I miss sandwiches." They escorted him past rows of translucent panels, some displaying rotating blueprints of the reactor, others showing long, scrolling tables of numbers that pulsed red and green like a stock market on caffeine. The ship had changed. It pulsed with a low hum now, steady and warm, like a heart that had finally remembered how to beat. A door hissed open. Inside, Varnok stood facing a wall-sized display showing a map of the Ulari territory. Dozens of systems blinked amber. Only one nestled near the bottom corner glowed bright green. "You have stabilized half our fleet." Elias stepped in, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, but the other half's still running on fumes. The Sabex will return, I figured." "Not exactly the subtle type." Varnok turned, a faint ripple passing across his metallic skin. "Your reactor is effective, but we require scale. That's the problem. You can't just copy the prototype and expect it to run the same way. Each one needs to be tuned to local waste composition." "You're throwing in alien garbage I've never even seen before. Half of it reacts like napalm when compressed. We will divert all salvageable refuse to a central processing facility. You need more than that. You need redundancy, filtration, intake regulation. And diagnostic controls that don't blink in base 10. Varnok studied him for a moment, then gestured to one of the hovering advisor drones. "Assign him a full engineering detachment, and give him unrestricted access to our archive vaults." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Vaults? You will require data on our planetary waste systems. They are ancient, buried, forgotten." "Sounds like a good weekend project." Varnok tilted his head. "I do not understand sarcasm." "Don't worry, I barely do either." 3 hours later, Elias was lowered into a subdeck chamber shaped like an inverted dome. The lights flickered as they descended, revealing stacks of archival hex cores, each glowing faintly blue, arrayed like books in a library designed by someone who hated readability. An Ulari technician with a translucent skull and rotating pupils approached him. "I am Kess. I will interpret the vault interface for you." "Great. You know anything about thermal decay curves in polymer-based composites?" "I know everything," Elias blinked. "No offense, but that's a heavy claim. I was grown with a neural imprint of all pre-collapse engineering disciplines." "I am incapable of forgetting." "Then you're about to have a long week." They began sorting through the archives. The vaults contained designs for early Ulari waste converters, most of which seemed to involve some combination of acidic dissolution, high-pressure compaction, and in one strange case, weaponized mold colonies. Elias skimmed through the data, occasionally pausing to mutter, "Why would anyone shred lithium with sound waves? Or this stabilization method is just a fancy way of boiling garbage." Kess blinked each time, noting his reactions with mild curiosity. "You are remarkably unimpressed. I've seen a guy in Reno power his RV with a bucket of compost and a car alternator. You learn not to be impressed until something doesn't explode." 3 days passed, each one more exhausting than the last. Elias barely slept. The ship's artificial day-night cycle didn't help. Time blurred. Meals came in the form of nutrient pastes in tubes that tasted like chalk mixed with soup stock. The engineering team, an oddball group of Ulari specialists, a gelatinous mechanic from a water world, and a sarcastic drone with a penchant for unsolicited advice, worked in rotating shifts around him. They constructed a test variant of the reactor in a moon-sized hangar, orbiting a dead planet. This time, the intake was modular. Elias insisted on triple redundancy, built-in fail-safes, and after a minor fire, a manual override that didn't require 4 limbs to activate. On the 4th day, the prototype fired up, steady and clean. A single cube of compressed alien food packaging powered an entire section of the ship for 6 hours. No sparks, no smoke, no overheating. Elias slumped against a railing, exhaling slowly. Finally, Kes floated beside him. This design is scalable. With proper calibration, it could power a small moon. Let's stick with ships for now. A red alert blared suddenly, bathing the chamber in light. Elias groaned, of course. Varnok's voice echoed through the comm grid. Emergency. Sabek's raiding party detected. They seek to capture the new reactor. Elias stood up straight, shoulder aching. Do they ever just send flowers? The engineering team scattered to their stations. Kes activated the reactor's shield grid. Elias sprinted half, limped down the catwalk toward the control hub. They're targeting the energy spike, Kes said, gliding alongside him. Then shut it down. Already done. They're still coming. The hangar shook. A Sabex boarding pod slammed into the outer hull, metal shrieking as claws dug into the structure. Elias reached the override console and keyed in a lockdown sequence just as the first set of Sabex soldiers breached the secondary hatch. They were smaller than he remembered, sleek, fast, with limbs that bent wrong and eyes like polished coal. One of them spotted Elias and lunged. Elias dove sideways, landing hard on his bad shoulder. Pain shot through his chest, but he kicked out blindly, catching the alien in the leg. Kes triggered a containment field, trapping the intruders in a shimmering cube of blue light. Elias groaned from the floor. Okay. That hurt more than I thought it would. You dislocated the clavicle brace. I must realign it. Can you knock me out first? No. Kes pressed 2 fingers against Elias's upper arm. A jolt of something cold and electric surged through him, and he screamed involuntarily. Then it was over. Kes helped him sit up. You are stabilized. Next time, warn me. I did. You said no. Elias staggered to his feet just as Varnok arrived, flanked by guards. They failed, Varnok said, looking down at the captured Sabex. But they will return. Stronger. Then we need to go faster. You are injured. I'll live. The Ulari do not heal as swiftly. You don't have to. You just have to hold until the next reactor is ready. Varnok looked at him for a long moment. You are an anomaly. I get that a lot. Elias turned back to the console, already rewriting the calibration code. You want to stop the Sabex. You want to survive. Then we need a system they can't predict. Something messy. Illogical. Human. You mean inefficient. I mean adaptive. Varnok folded 2 hands behind his back. Then teach us. Elias tapped the console, eyes focused. Lesson 1. Nothing is ever finished. It just keeps evolving. The reactor on Ulari Vessel 9 had been running for 3 full cycles without incident. Elias Trent sat cross-legged on a grated platform, holding a cracked tablet screen in one hand and a half-eaten protein bar in the other. The engineering bay was quiet now, save for the steady drone of the reactor's intake converters and the occasional hiss of pressure valves adjusting. He'd finally convinced the Ulari to stop filtering their data through rotating image glyphs and let him build a proper interface, one he could read, without feeling like he was deciphering a kaleidoscope. Kes floated nearby, adjusting the positioning of a waste separator with a tool that resembled a glowing wishbone. You are consuming inadequate nutrition, Kes said without looking up. This bar has 24 grams of protein, but no fiber, no minerals. Your digestive rhythms have become erratic. They've always been erratic. You also haven't urinated in 14 hours. Elias paused mid-bite. That's weirdly specific. I monitor your vitals. I didn't ask you to. You didn't ask me not to. Elias groaned and swung his legs off the platform. Fine, I'll drink more water. You sound like my aunt. I have no aunts. Lucky you. He tossed the wrapper into a chute marked organic feedstock. A moment later, a screen blinked green, registering a microjoule of power return. Even trash wrappers counted. A chime rang out through the bay. Not the usual alarm, but a softer tone, one Elias hadn't heard before. He looked up as a ceiling panel retracted and Varnok descended on a slow platform. His robes shimmered with freshly embedded circuitry, and his two left arms bore what looked like ceremonial armor plates made of recycled reactor casings. "You were summoned 2 hours ago," Varnok said. "I was calibrating Chamber 6. It kept throwing off heat signatures like a dying microwave. "I require your presence in the medical suite." Elias raised an eyebrow. "I'm not bleeding. Not yet." That wasn't reassuring. They left the bay and made their way into a sector Elias hadn't visited before. The walls in this area were curved inward, with embedded lights that pulsed in sync with the ship's gravity generator. The air smelled faintly of iron and citrus rind. Inside the medical suite, 3 Ulari physicians stood around a slab that looked suspiciously like a dentist's chair welded to an autopsy table. One of them gestured for Elias to lie down. "Is this about the shoulder again?" he asked. "No," Varnok said. "You are being prepared for neural telemetry alignment. Sounds invasive. It is." Elias reluctantly climbed onto the slab, flinching as cold metal met his back. "Can I at least know what this does before you jam anything into my skull?" "You are not being implanted," one of the physicians said. "You are being mapped. The reactor systems require adaptive command integration. Your decisions are erratic but efficient. We will mirror that pattern. You're trying to teach the reactor how to think like me, not think, choose." Elias stared at the ceiling. "Do I get a say in this?" "No," Varnok said. "Figures." A helmet lowered over his head, smooth and seamless. It made a low humming sound that vibrated through his jaw, then silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly his vision blurred, and a series of images flashed across his eyes, memories, calculations, blueprints. The time he'd accidentally hotwired a vending machine using a coat hanger and a car battery. He gritted his teeth. "Warn me next time." The helmet lifted. One of the physicians scanned his temple with a pale wand. "You experienced no permanent disruption." Elias sat up slowly, dizzy and sweating. "That's not the same as saying everything's fine. You are functioning." "Barely." He swung his legs off the slab and stood, wobbling slightly. Varnok studied him. "Your neural patterns are chaotic. Your memory indexing is nonlinear. Your decision logic contradicts itself. I call it improvisation. It is difficult to replicate. Welcome to humanity." By the time they returned to the reactor bay, the engineering team had gathered near the main console. Kes had already begun integrating the neural pattern model into the control matrix. The others watched silently as lines of code twisted into new configurations, forming a decision tree that shifted every few seconds. One of the engineers, a long-limbed creature with skin like melted glass, stepped forward. "This interface will not hold. It is too unstable." "It's not supposed to hold," Elias said. "It's supposed to adapt. The way I do. There is no algorithm for chaos." "Then stop trying to make one." Kes rotated slightly. "He is correct. The new system must tolerate unpredictability." The glass-skinned engineer made a clicking noise of protest but didn't argue further. They ran the first test an hour later. A simulated waste stream was fed into the reactor, randomized to include materials the system hadn't seen before. Pressurized foam, synthetic bone fragments, and a liquid polymer that reacted violently when compressed. The reactor hesitated, then adjusted. It rerouted pressure, altered temperature gradients, and spun the foam into filament insulation. The heat curve dropped. The output rose. Elias leaned back against the rail and exhaled slowly. "That's the first time it's ever handled that mix without a blowout." Kes nodded once. "The system is learning." Varnok approached the console. "With this, we can decentralize power distribution. Each ship can sustain itself." "Exactly," Elias said, "but you're still missing the big piece." Varnok's eyes glinted. "What piece? You've been fighting the Sabex for how long? 316 cycles. And how many times have you tried to win by outmatching them? Every time. Then maybe don't." There was a pause. Kes floated closer. "You propose surrender?" "No. I'm saying stop playing by their rules. You keep building giant reactors, huge ships, centralized command structures. That's what they expect. Build small, build mobile, build unpredictable. Varnok folded his arms. I am not a scavenger. No, Elias said, you're a survivor. Start acting like one. Varnok remained silent for a long moment, then he turned to the engineers. Begin design revisions. 10 mobile reactors, 1 per sector. Each must be built from local salvage. No uniform design. One of the engineers hesitated. That will make maintenance inefficient. Good, Elias said. That's the idea. 2 weeks passed. The mobile reactors were completed. Each one was different, one shaped like a coiled vine, another like a cluster of spinning disks, another built into the husk of a long dead mining ship. They were launched from Vessel 9 and scattered across Ulari territory, each one hidden inside a nebula, under ice, or buried in asteroid fields. The Sabex returned on the 14th day. They hit a decoy ship powered by a dummy reactor. It exploded harmlessly, broadcasting false data trails that led them into a gravitational sinkhole. The rest of the fleet vanished from their sensors. For the first time in centuries, the Ulari were invisible. Elias stood in the observation deck, watching a stream of escape trajectories blink across the display. Varnok joined him, silent at first. You have made us ghosts. You made yourselves ghosts. I just gave you the sheet. Varnok turned to him. What will you do now? Elias shrugged. Go home, fix my generator, maybe clean my garage. You could stay. I'm not built for thrones and fleets. I build things, I break things, I try again. Varnok nodded once. You have given us more than power. You have given us contradiction. Glad I could confuse you into survival. When the shuttle touched down in his backyard 4 days later, the sky was clear. Biscuit barked once, then promptly rolled onto his back in expectation of belly rubs. Elias stepped out, the desert wind warm against his face. He looked up at the stars. Then he opened his garage, picked up a rusted fan, and smiled. He had work to do.